Hello, I'm Chris, and this is CB Music Club. So, I will introduce us all here. We've got Nick.
Hello.
We've got Will.
Hello.
And we've got Al.
Hello there.
And tonight we are in 2011. Before we get onto that, we need to ask, what have we all been listening to this week? So, Nick, do you want to start us off?
Sure. Yeah, because I'm on holiday, I have been binging on music documentaries this week. So, a couple of things. One was a documentary about Sleaford Mods called Bunch of Kunst from about 2017. And the other one couldn't be probably further away, was a documentary called Echo Canyon, all about the Laurel Canyon scene in the 60s. It was a film made by Jacob Dylan, who's gone back and interviewed all the musicians from that scene. And also they apparently recorded an album with modern artists covering those songs, which is very entertaining. So I went from inner city UK punk to idyllic 60s era harmonies. It's quite a remarkable journey. And the weirdest thing is how remarkably like his dad, Jacob Dylan, looks. It's just incredible.
Because no one's ever looked like that before, right?
But wow, they are just absolutely spitting image. It's remarkable.
I don't know what he looks like, so I don't know why I'm making fun of your statement.
Like his dad.
Well, he looks like Bob Dylan.
Good point. I've never seen him, is what I mean.
Yeah.
Right? Not that I don't know what he
You'd
looks like.
recognise him in the supermarket.
I'd recognise his dad. I don't know about him. Documentaries. My favourite music documentary is Anvil, the story of Anvil. Have you all seen that? I'm sure we've talked about this
I love
before.
that film.
It's wonderful. It's not just my favourite music documentary. It's one of my very favourite documentary films I've ever seen. It's absolutely amazing. Have you all seen it? Apart from Nick.
I saw it in the cinema when it came out.
Ooh.
Just fantastic. Absolutely fantastic movie.
Yeah. Well, I'd recommend it. It's amazing.
So, Will, what have you been listening to?
Almost nothing, because it's Christmas. I took some time off. Esther showed me a YouTube video of my nephew who goes by the name of Ratty Jack. And he's a rap artist, and he's been making music for a couple of years now. He's got his SoundCloud and YouTube channels, and he just put out something that he'd actually gone into his studio to produce. It's called Slowly, and he actually did a little animated film to go with it, which was good. But here am I, an old man, listening to rap, and I don't get it. I seriously don't get rap. I can understand the way the words work, and I can understand the fluency and the poetry of it, but I guess it's not meant for me, and why should it be? I can appreciate the musicality, kind of all of that. That was good, but it's actually what he's talking about is nothing to do with me. The subject. It's not me.
Okay. Is that just to kind of disconnect with the youth of today thing, though, rather than it's not the music you got a problem with? It's the
it's a disconnect with the youth, and
You're
not
getting old, mate.
Well, I can't say I feel your pain, because I don't.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to pretend to. I still liked what he'd done. It's just I can't connect to it that well, and that's a problem I think I have with all rap music. It started and ended with John Cooper Clarke for me, I suppose, who was our punk rap artist, if you like.
Yeah, and still going strong.
What was his name again, Will?
Ratty Jack.
Ratty Jack.
Ratty Jack.
Yeah, we'll stick a link in the description. And yeah, maybe boost his audience figures by 5. You remind me of, have you seen, it's the very first episode of Stewart Lee's Comedy Vehicle, where he's talking about toilet books. And is it Asher D from So Solid Crew? He's talking about his book, and he's talking about the rappers. It's very amusing, worth finding on the YouTube. And just basically being too old to appreciate what it's about. Very much what Will's talking about. Very funny. I'm a fan of Stewart Lee. Don't hate everything. Everyone thinks I do.
What about you, Chris?
A lot of Christmas carols, being Christmas and all that.
Bit Chris Rea on repeat.
That's one of my favourite. That is Driving Home for Christmas. I listened to the absolutely awful Robbie Williams Christmas album from a couple of years ago, and it is truly awful. There's a collection of kind of half of them are cover versions, and the other half are new Christmas songs, and they're just dreadful. And I listened to the actually Charlie, my boy, bought me the Arctic Monkeys live at the Royal Albert Hall album for Christmas this year. So I was listening to that, which was great, just to kind of, although it's not live music, but just to hear the sound of a gig going down and a crowd cheering, and it was quite refreshing for that, and also some great tracks on it. So yeah, kind of enjoyed that. And what about you, Al? What have you been listening to?
Well, like Will, not a huge amount. Just with being Christmas, travelling to stay with parents and so on, which is very nice, but I haven't done much music listening. I've been listening to PJ Harvey, not just the album we're discussing later, but I got a couple of tunes stuck in my head. This Is Love, so I was listening to a bit of Source from City, Source from the Sea, and Man Size from Rid of Me. I was listening to Rid of Me. Rid of Me is a great album. It's a real racket. Steve Albini production, and like everything's the wrong volume and sounds like it's been played with sandpaper. It's so abrasive, and it's just, yeah, it's a great album. I think 50 Foot Queenie is my favourite PJ Harvey song, which is on Rid of Me. But the other thing I listened to while I was cooking Christmas dinner, I wanted something like comfortable that I knew to have on, and I put on Bruce Springsteen, Darkness on the Edge of Town. And that's a lovely album, isn't it? But then when it was finished and I was still nowhere near the cooking, I thought, because I promised you I'd do this, Nick, in our very first podcast, I put on Born to Run. But also obviously by Bruce Springsteen, and it's a great album. It's absolutely fantastic. I've only listened to it once, and absolute winner. It's really, really, really good. I think it's probably somewhat better than Darkness on the Edge of Town, but you never know, because sometimes stuff you like straight off you end up finding a bit shallow. But there's quite a lot going on in it. It's quite interesting. It's quite positive and uplifting. And I think my favourite thing about it is that, I mean, bear in mind, I'd never heard the song before, so I wouldn't have been able to do this on purpose. But as the last song, Jungleland, the last chord rang out, as I put the last plates on the table to serve up dinner, it was perfect timing. That's why he's the boss, right? Stuff like that. So, Born to Run, what a fantastic album. I wish I'd chosen that for a podcast viewing.
A good album to cook Christmas dinner to.
It really is, yeah. And the Christmas dinner was excellent. And I think that was probably a bit down to Bruce Springsteen as well. Thanks, Bruce.
What are we all drinking tonight? Nick, what's in your glass?
I have some beer from the Electric Bear Brewing Company in Bath, apparently. And this was a gift from neighbour across the road. This is a West Coast IPA called Same As It Never Was. And it's absolutely delicious, I have to say.
Nick, can I ask a quick question? Every time we do this, you're just telling us about someone gave you the booze you're drinking. Do you ever buy your own alcohol?
But don't need to, mate.
Apparently not. Lucky you.
That's just a good point.
Do you know, it's one of these things where we have been having socially distant drinks outside, and I've been such a great host and supplying the drinks that he keeps sort of deciding to return the favour by dropping beers on my doorstep the next day.
The gift that keeps on giving.
Yeah.
What about you, Al?
Well, I've just poured myself the same Castle's double cream milk stout that you were drinking 2 weeks ago. Again, courtesy of our good friend, Paddy McVeigh from New Zealand.
Hey, Paddy.
Thank you very much, Paddy. Keep sending them. We'll keep talking about you. And there's nothing better
Absolutely,
than that.
Paddy. Right? Chris dropped a bottle off. I drank it on Christmas Day. It was very enjoyable.
All those supplies have gone now, so we need another podcast listener to drop off our next batch of...
or, to be fair, the same one
of drinks
would
for
be okay.
the evening.
I have to say, my neighbour across the street is brilliant, so...
Is he a listener?
I'll make sure he does.
Does he have my address?
Excellent. No, it is a nice beer. It's a nice beer, that.
It is very nice, yeah. Thanks, Paddy.
And Will, you're off the wagon.
Temporarily, yeah. I'm drinking a massive IPA from the Great South Bay Brewery on Long Island. Well, it says it's from Long Island. It could actually be from around the corner. I don't know. But it's actually a very nice wee tipple. So, very pleased with my choice.
Very good.
After that, I will be having the milk stout that we aforementioned.
Can I just jump in quickly
Nice.
and apologise to anyone who was listening to the last podcast for my crisp eating? When I listened to it back, I was kind of disgusted by how much noise I was making. So I'm on the cashew nuts tonight. Sorry about that.
They're not exactly chewy though, cashew nuts, are they?
They don't make
They are
much
soft
Bit
noise.
of a crunch there.
Soft crunch,
The noise I was making last time was terrible. I'm ashamed of myself, quite frankly. So I thought, go for some nuts rather than some crisps tonight. Because you can't have beer without a snack, right?
Maybe we need to introduce the "What are you eating" section as well.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Account for those sound effects. Anyway, let's get back on track. I'm drinking, since it's just gone Christmas, we had lots of weird stuff like Baileys and Kahlua in the house.
Ooh,
So the only solution was to make myself a White Russian.
nice.
Cheers.
Yeah.
Well, cheers, dude.
Good call. Cheers, everyone.
So a little musical break, and then I think Will's going to take us into 2011.
Okay, so 2011. Glastonbury, the premier middle-class festival event in the UK. Beyonce did the premiere finale. I didn't obviously go to Glastonbury because...
You're not sufficiently middle class.
well, I didn't really want to say that, but I did see her perform on telly, and just an incredible performance, absolutely incredible. And so for the royal watchers out there, Will and Kate got married.
That long ago.
That long ago. Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2, the final film of the Harry Potter series, was premiered. We mentioned Stewart Lee earlier on. Stewart Lee on Harry Potter books. Anyone out there, just Google that and look at it on YouTube. It's hilarious, and it also encompasses what I think about Harry Potter as well. So yeah, Stewart Lee's Harry Potter books. And I also read that Osama bin Laden was killed by US Special Forces. And I did think to myself when I read that, surely he was assassinated by US Special Forces. And this is the terrible thing about us in the West. If we kind of go after someone that we don't particularly like, we kill them. If they do it to us, then they assassinate one of us. It's just double standards. It's not that I disagree with Osama bin Laden being assassinated, but it's just the way it's kind of termed. Like it's okay to do that.
Was it not still part of the ongoing war, though, in which case it counts as a kill rather than an assassination? I think an assassination is a kind of targeted hit during peacetime.
But how can you be at war with Osama bin Laden and what he represented? He didn't represent a country, so how could we be at war with him? Anyway,
because the war was against the Taliban, wasn't it? At that point.
But can you be at war with the Taliban?
Al-Qaeda.
I mean, they're not a country. I don't know. Anyway, you're listening to CB Politics Club.
Okay, so I'm going to move on. I am moving on. There was an earthquake and tsunami which affected and overran the nuclear reactor at Fukushima.
Oh, I've got a story about that.
Mm.
I was supposed to be going to Japan. In fact, we mentioned our mutual friend Jody before. We managed to secure some money from Channel 4 to go and develop a documentary. And Jody had arrived in Tokyo, and I was supposed to be going out 2 or 3 days later. And the night before I was supposed to go out, the earthquake struck. So it was all looking a little bit up in the air. And I think overnight the tsunami had hit. So obviously things were getting particularly worse. And I was on the phone to Jody, and he was kind of like, well, we're still trying to make it happen. And then I got on the bus to go into town and was just about to go out to the airport when the nuclear power station went into meltdown. Did it actually go into meltdown? Anyway, it was severely overrun and was on the point. At which point we did finally decide to pull out and call the whole trip off. But it was just that escalated. Obviously, it was a dreadful event and a tragic loss of life. But from a personal point of view, it was just that ever-escalating catastrophe that just, as each step went along, the prospect of actually going out there became even more
22,000 people died as a result of it, which is terrible.
That's an amazingly large number.
Yeah. This year in particular, I mean, a month earlier, there'd been a large earthquake in New Zealand, in Christchurch, and
remember that,
there were several other major earthquakes throughout the year. The newspaper, The News of the World, printed its last edition due to a prolonged campaign against it. And what followed in the UK was a toilet paper shortage. But there you go. Boom.
Again, you're listening to CB Politics Club.
In the UK, we had riots in Birmingham, Bristol, Liverpool over a police shooting of a young man called Mark Duggan. Steve Jobs, the CEO of Apple, died of pancreatic cancer. And we had I don't know whether you remember this, the Occupy Wall Street protests, where people sort of camped at Wall Street for 3 or 4 months, didn't they? Yeah. To try and bring to light the inequalities of life. And they had a big poster, which was my favourite at the time, which just said, "We are the 99%," which is quite pertinent. Lots of people died. Lots of famous people died in 2011. But the only one that would have mattered to me, no, I don't mean that. The one that struck me most was Amy Winehouse. In May, and I can't even pronounce it, the Grimsvaltin volcano erupted in Iceland.
I remember
which
that,
trapped travellers all over the world, and it trapped me. I was in Montreal on a research trip, and I couldn't get home, and I didn't want to stay in Montreal because it's quite an expensive city, so I negotiated for them to fly me out to Edmonton, and I spent another couple of weeks in Edmonton with a friend until I could get a flight home. But in all, I was stranded in Canada for 3 weeks, and lots of other people had the same problems. And the last thing is a kind of technical thing about space travel, which I quite like. The space shuttle did its final mission before it was mothballed, which was for a young boy growing up building kits of this kind of stuff. I really did like the idea of the shuttle, if nothing else.
Yeah, same here.
That's my 2011.
Well, what strikes me about it all is, and I realise this is just like, we're getting old, it's how recent it all seems. Some of that stuff I'm just thinking has only just happened, and it's almost a decade now. And
I saw a space shuttle taking off.
Ooh.
IRL.
Wow.
In 1981, we went on a family holiday to Florida. We did the Disney World bit and then went to Cape Canaveral. We were staying in a little motel nearby, and we got into this sort of big motel room, turned on the TV in the corner of the room, and it was the news, and they were reporting live from Cape Canaveral on the launch of the shuttle. And we watched it taking off. My dad turned around and looked out the window, and there it was, going up. You could see it was just a few miles away. So we sort of ran outside to watch. And there was a rattlesnake sitting next to a little palm tree that was on the sidewalk, which rose up and hissed at us, scared the living crap out of us. So we had to run back into the room again. And my dad had to go to reception and say, there's a rattlesnake outside our room. And the guy in reception came along with a bucket and spade and whacked it over the head and took it off to the kitchen. That was the end of the rattlesnake. Yeah, apparently rattlesnake was apparently rattlesnake was a delicacy, and so they were off to do that. Good eating in that, apparently.
All right, is that our 2011?
That is our 2011.
So, Let England Shake by PJ Harvey is our album of this week. I chose this because I was trying to find an album that we might all like. It was one of the reasons.
Oh dear.
Well, I know it's ever going to be possible, isn't it? I knew this album, and it had also done extraordinarily well for the year. It topped various albums of the year list. It won the Mercury Prize for the second time. PJ Harvey became the second only artist up to this point to win the Mercury Prize twice, and is quite an extraordinary and a dramatic piece of work. I suppose my knowledge of PJ Harvey started back with it was kind of her first solo album. She had a couple of albums as PJ Harvey prior to that point, but that was a kind of a band called PJ Harvey, and then her first album on her own was To Bring You My Love, which was when I first saw her performing on Later with Jules Holland when she was singing I think, To Bring You My Love, and she just had a big wooden staff which she was pounding on the stage as part of the percussive beat of the track, and she just struck me as something quite extraordinary and dramatic and worthy of attention, and very much love that album. Haven't got all her stuff, but kind of bits like that, Songs from the City, Songs from the Sea, and then Let England Shake when it came out. And I think they're three very, very brilliant albums, in my humble opinion, that are treasured in my record collection. Let England Shake, very different from her previous stuff. Obviously very rooted in themes of war. It is her war album, if you like. Very politicised album. As we just heard from Will, it was quite a fractious time. I suppose it comes on the tail end of Iraq, Afghanistan wars. It was written over 2.5 years, apparently, though, so it's kind of not exactly rooted in specific events, and then recorded over 2 or 3 weeks. And yeah, came out to great critical acclaim. So I came back to it, although I hadn't listened to it for quite some time, and so I kind of came back to it with fresh ears. Well, I mean, that's a sort of a rambling introduction to it. What did you all think of it? And I'll hold my opinion back. Well, Al, I sense you weren't as blown away by it as you might have.
Well, bit of background with PJ Harvey. I've known PJ Harvey a bit longer, obviously, than you have. My first awareness was her second single, Sheila and a Gig, which is obviously on her first album, Dry, and I thought it was great when the first I heard it. It's just, I mean, there's nothing that special about it. It's just a nice sort of quiet, loud song with a good chorus, and it's reasonably interesting what's going on there. But it's a good tune, and I liked her from the off. I'm a very big fan of her second album, Rid of Me, which was it's only as you said, it's only the first 2 albums that were done with the trio, and they were a very interesting band. Lots of like weird timing stuff goes on. Rid of Me particularly is quite a challenging listen. It's Steve Albini production, and like all Steve Albini productions, the drums are very loud, everything's the wrong volume, and it's not like you'd expect it to be. It's very in your face, very abrasive, and I think it's great. And I didn't really pay much attention to her after that up until my first listen, although I do think of it as being a bit sort of mainstream, middle of the road compared to what I know before. But there's no doubt that song for song it's a better album than Rid of Me is, but Rid of Me for me has just got that. What makes it challenging is what makes me like it more. I'd never listened to Let England Shake before you chose this album for us to listen to, and I really liked the first song. I thought, this is sounding all right to me, but I found it quite hard work on that first listen because it has a sound that it's sticking with from start to finish. And it doesn't sound like very many other albums, really. And actually, one of the reasons for this is there's no bass on it. No one's playing bass at any point on the album, which is quite an interesting decision and gives it a very singular sound. But yeah, I wasn't blown away at first, but I will admit that it did grow on me. Yeah, I'll hand over to someone else to give their initial views on it.
Yeah, first impressions, Will.
Well, I kind of looked up the album's bio and found out it was recorded in a church in Dorset. And this may be projected association, but the sound, kind of both almost simultaneously muted and cavernous, kind of reminded me of the kind of noise you get in a church. And this might sound weird, but I felt let in to this album. I felt let in to the music as part of an audience of it. I think it's brave, brilliant song making, and it's a treasure. I love this album. This album got the best marks of all the albums we've done so far by a long way. Ooh. I have a tick system. I have a little tick system. I'm kind of a bit like that. So I give each song a tick. No ticks for not very good, 1 tick for good, 2 ticks for very good, and 3 ticks for excellent. And this album scored very well.
Very well. And Nick, many ticks from Nick?
Do you know, it's...
On first impressions?
My first impressions are, I really enjoyed this album. I have avoided it, actually, for years. And I, like you, sort of come on board early on with PJ Harvey, really liked the early stuff. But there was something, I don't know whether, I think, and we're back to CB Politics Club, I think there was something about the time and the subject matter of this album that I avoided it at the time. And I think it was, I don't know if it's something about you ask a Scottish person to listen to an album about English colonialism and it's not necessarily something that I wanted to hear, I think. And I just kind of, I don't know, I was a bit dubious about it, although, you know, when I finally got to it this time around, it really kind of, it really blew me away.
Do you know, as the other Scottish person here, I think I probably felt that way about it a bit as well. It's a trait in every nation, I think, to go on about yourselves a little bit, and there's no doubt, you know, Scottish music revels in its Scottishness as well, but I don't know, there is sometimes a thing about the English banging on about how much they hate the English, which can be a bit wearing.
There's nothing particularly sympathetic towards England.
And this album is not particularly guilty of that.
Although it's called Let England Shake, and various tracks, there's Let England Shake and there's a track called England. Its overriding theme is war rather than England. I mean, there are tracks, there are more tracks about Gallipoli than anything else.
Yeah, but this is the point I was about to make, Chris, that yes, you are right about that, but you know, it's called Let England Shake. There's a track called England. There's a track called Let England Shake. The Last Living Rose, This Glorious Land. You know, it does all seem a bit kind of English. Yep. And if you're not English... And
I think my problem at the time was, I think a lot of the critical response to it was, this is about England's place in, or Englishness in the context of war. It's about our history. And it just didn't seem like something I wanted to particularly
I can understand that
connect with at that point, so I just kind of
this is not Scottish chip on shoulder stuff or anything like that. It's just like, I'm not English, you know, and even though I lived in England at the time, and I've lived in England for most of my adult life, I'm not English, and it's just not necessarily that interesting, and I think that actually it does do the album an injustice. It's more interesting than that.
Well, I think it is, absolutely is, and that's been my response, having listened to it properly and gone, there is so much in this, and it's such an interesting album. And actually, it's so much more than it. It's not English; it's global.
Yeah, it's there's that kind of sense of deep historical past. But I mean, it's kind of it taps into English Civil War. It taps into First World War. It taps into Afghanistan. It's got its kind of draws its themes from across all conflicts. But I suppose sorry, I didn't really get into my first... Can I have a first impression of coming back to something?
Of course you can,
first time in some time. I kind of... three things that struck me. One was that the music kind of... You know, it's quite often, if you're making an album with such kind of stark subject matter, that the subject matter, the content of the lyrics can kind of become overbearing on the album. I think this didn't. The music is extraordinary, and the music is quite a warm album, kind of instrumentally, in a way that's in extreme contrast with the brutality and graphic nature of the lyrics. But that over warm, there's very kind of warm, rich tones in the instrumentation of it. Another thing that really stands out for me in this album is the percussion, not just the drums, but all sense of percussion. It's just the percussion in the guitar playing, in her voice, but in the drums and the other percussive instruments that are used, it's got a real kind of... And it's not even kind of... Well, I suppose there are essence of battle drums in it, but really it's just that just very, very rich, multi-layered percussion. And the third is her voice, which she does things with her voice in this album that is completely different from what she's done in previous albums. I mean, she's hitting... It's not even falsetto, it's just extremely high, almost kind of choral singing at points. I think she has said, when talking about the making of this album, that her usual singing voice just didn't suit the songs at all, so she had to kind of find a new voice when she recorded Let England Shake, which they kind of did in the recording studio. But yeah, she does extraordinary things with her voice. And those three things together, you know, the content and the percussion and the voice, just made for a remarkable album, I thought. First impressions.
I would agree with you, Chris, and actually I think I read a review in, I can't remember if it was The Quietus, where there was a line describing it as the treasure chest rattle of percussion, which I thought was just perfect.
Following on from our long and rambling dissection of the drums on Prince's Purple Rain. From
I thought that was laser focused, personally.
Opposite in terms of this is a very different use of...
and very much better use as well.
Is it worth rattling through it track by track? I'm happy.
Yeah, if you'd like to, yeah.
So the title track first. What do you think about
I
that?
think
Title
so.
track, first track. Are you using up all your bullets too early?
No, I think it's often the best
Title
place
track,
to put the
last track,
title track.
first
It's
track.
making a statement, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
This is.
Yeah.
I mean, this is what the album's about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the first lines of that song just are extraordinary. The West asleep, let England shake.
It was a
I think that's
surprising
just
start.
incredible.
The dominance of the xylophone
Yeah.
as your kind of main instrument all the way through it. It just creates a very, very extraordinary sound. But again, works very, very well. It's that. I think you were talking earlier about the lack of bass, but the xylophone does the job of a bass guitar perfectly well in this track.
I think, interesting, but as a bassist, I normally listen for the bass lines, and I instinctively didn't even bother with any of these tracks, and it didn't bother me, and it didn't register because they just weren't necessary. And that's unusual for pop music, not to need a bass backing it up. And it was only when Al said there was not a bass that I went, oh yeah, you're right, no bass.
It's something we were talking about. I mean, Chris, you raised it with When Doves Cry in the last podcast, and that it has no bass, and that's unusual. To have a whole album with no bass really is just a bit weird. But it works.
God, yes, it
zither
works.
on Let England Shake, not guitar, which is quite interesting as well. There are some interesting instrumental choices. I like stuff that's odd, not necessarily too forcibly odd, but
Yeah.
they're doing regular things in an irregular way, which it works for me. Yeah, it's a good tune. It's quite catchy. I couldn't get it out of my head for ages after the first listen, which is always a good sign.
It is, yeah, it's very catchy. There's one bit that's always kind of
Second verse when the
troubled me on this track. There's
the vocal cut.
Yeah, where it almost sounds like an overdub of a vocal cut. And when I first heard the album on CD, I thought there was a scratch or a blip on my CD, but obviously every version of it has the same. And I don't know why
I
it's
can't
there.
understand that either. It's a very. It sounds like a mistake in the editing, doesn't it?
No. But I can't believe it would have been a mistake in the production because everything else is so flawless all the way through it. So a deliberate choice, but it sounds like a
Yes, I agree with you. It's a very, very odd thing.
Don't know.
And every time I've listened to it, I've forgotten about it, and then it happens, and I'm like, just don't expect it. It's weird, man.
Because it's not even an addition of an extra word. It kind of it's like a stumble of the time, and it knocks the timing out ever so slightly.
And the vocal changes pitch instantaneously.
It interrupts
I mean,
the rhythm.
it's obviously an editing thing, but it's whether it's been done deliberately or whether they did it and it sounded weird and decided to keep it. I don't know, but it's fine.
Yeah, maybe so.
It's fine. Maybe they recorded it to tape, and maybe it is an actual tape splice. I mean, I don't know. Wasn't there. But yeah, that's a good song, isn't it? Very good opening. Really.
It is, yeah. One of the very strong
statement of
opener,
intent.
certainly.
I like that at the start of an album.
Two ticks.
2 ticks.
And that's followed by Last Living Rose.
Again, good song.
With the interesting opener, Goddamn Europeans, Take Me Back to Beautiful England.
Yeah.
But then it goes on to list a litany of everything that's awful about England. There's no, just on the lyrics, it's one of those albums that there are bits of choruses, but on the whole it kind of defies the usual convention of verse, chorus, verse, set up through the songs. The songs develop as they go along, quite often end very differently from how they started, but in terms of any kind of conventional
and a lot of them are very brief as well, which I quite like. They don't overstay their welcome. They make their point, and then that's good enough.
Yep.
They never get preachy in that sense, where you think that a lot of artists writing songs like these, they would be like 8-9 minutes long, where they really made their point, and there's none of that here. It's all quite understated, actually, which I really do appreciate about it.
The other thing I really liked about this song was the saxophone.
Oh yeah, it's brilliant. The brass coming in is really fantastic.
It's absolutely fantastic.
And I love the way it's quite rough.
And
the brass is quite rough in the recording and the mix, quite raw. And I really quite like that about it, because too often you hear saxophone recorded, it's so smooth, and I hate that. I used to really hate the saxophone because it was always so goddamn smooth. It was always Kenny G styly, and this is like the antithesis of that. It's really good. You're right, Nick. It's special.
And she, I think she was playing it. She just learned. She learned to play.
Actually, no. She's always played saxophone. Yeah, apparently she played sax in her first band she was ever in. She's a proper multi-instrumentalist. Okay. She's one of the David Bowie-like figure. She can pretty much play anything. He was a saxophonist as well originally, wasn't he? So yeah.
But there is sax all the way through this album, and again, it's one of those instruments that substitutes the bass. Because it's generally, it's not what you think of as your traditional sax solo. It's there as tones, long.
Yeah, it's a horn section. I mean, there's
earthy,
there's trombone there with it all the
it.
time as well. Which it's a horn section. It sounds great. Yeah, but it's not done in a smoothly produced style, which I really like about it. It's sort of that sort of roughness kind of suits the overall vibe of the album, I think.
But I think that's where some of the warmth that I was talking about comes from. Those tones of the the use of the xylophone and the saxophone gives it that real kind of earthy warmth. Which does form a very kind of strong opposition to the kind of brutality of the lyrics. It's a nice warm bed for it all to sit in. The endings as well are extremely definitive. Stuff just stops with a purpose rather than peter out.
It's funny that I normally, when we do this, I write a bit of a note of every track, and I've barely, apart from track 8, In the Dark Places, I've not written anything. I've just
it's all just ticks, is it?
Sat back and enjoyed this. I've just enjoyed it. There's nothing to, there's obvious things to say are brilliant, but it would be almost like picking stuff out that belongs together, and it is weird. This album's one of the few albums that actually has shut me up. I haven't got anything to say. I can tell you my ticks, but other than that, track by track, I haven't got much to say.
Oh,
it shut me up.
What about The Glorious Land? Track 3 with the
2 ticks.
Yeah, I love the. I presume it's a bugle in this.
Bugle,
the rallying call.
Bugle calls and
which. Again, is remarkable because it shouldn't work. It's so at odds with the rhythm of the tune, and it's dropped in and it's used kind of 4 or 5 times repeatedly. But it against all the odds, it fits perfectly with the rhythm and the beat. It's remarkable.
I think that happens a few times on the album where you're sort of coming in with things you're not sure if everything's in time and it sort of settles in. We'll talk about England, the track later, but kind of things settle down together and suddenly they hit their groove, and this is good.
You're right. They do settle down, don't they? And they take the time. Again, it's the extraordinary nature of these songs that we just go, yeah, that's okay. How many other musicians would be allowed to have a tune-up on stage, more or less? Yeah, that's just brilliant.
I think it's very well done because it's not in time with the music, but they've managed to get it in time, even though it's a different time signature, and it fits.
Yeah.
It's very imaginative. I like it. It's jarring, but it works.
I think imaginative is really interesting because I think it was at this point in the album, and when we get into the next song, when I started to think really differently about start to understand that this was not just a musician releasing an album with a bunch of their latest songs. This was a concept, a piece of art that was being made that went beyond individual songwriting. It was conceptual in the way that she was thinking about the music, about the lyrics, about her vocals, about the theme, and all of it was kind of really much more powerful. And it's like this is her war musical,
Yeah,
it's kind of there's something about that, and I think that really kind of came with the next song. But it was starting to, that sort of feeling was starting to come to me in this song.
Her voice does some very odd things on this one. That pronunciation of America and England, America. It's just but it
it's
works.
quite an
It's
intense
kind of
song as well. It's
picking up syllables.
I like it. It builds quite well to the end as well. And I think it's one of those. This happened quite a lot. My first few listens to the album, where there were quite a few of them when he started off. I was like, not sure if I like this one. Before getting to the end of it and thinking, actually, yeah, I do. Like every single time, I did the same thing. And I just there's quite good dynamics in it. And I think that's quite difficult to achieve without a bass as well, because you are missing that frequency range in large part, and that's often the thing that drives a song forward and makes it powerful. So it's just very clever. Yeah, well done. It's one of the things I thought this when I was like investigating later on when we do our favorite number one single of the year, is that the mainstream pop music by this time is just all bass. There's nothing else going on in them really at all, and it's really refreshing to hear something that isn't just like bass all the time. I like guitars, and I like the mid-range instruments that make big clanging noises, are noisy rather than just loud. And although this is not a noisy album, it does get fairly noisy at times, I suppose. But it's just really refreshing to not have a bass farting all over me all the time.
The other thing that this album does have is a lot of male, quite bassy backing vocals, which again maybe fills that gap. There's a lot of deeper harmonies.
And there's a lot of space for it again, just because of
farting over you.
Yeah. Well, I just feel that way about bass. It's everywhere.
Farting
I like
over you.
mono bass in the middle and not like spread all over everything and not. Yeah, it's like farting over me. It's
I see what you mean.
It's just overpowering and it's too much.
Because I make you sound good.
Boring.
Just remember that I make you sound good.
You make everyone sound good, Will.
Oh.
That was a compliment.
Boom.
It was.
Yeah, right.
So the next track is the only one on the album that does have some bass. Words That Maketh Murder.
Does it have a bass on it?
Yeah, it does, according to the track listing.
Well, how about that? Okay. I didn't hear any bass.
Bass and bass
I didn't
harmonica.
hear any bass in it, but there you go. As I say, I wasn't
What
there.
a shame that a bass should ruin a good song.
Yeah. It's a pity. I really liked it up till that point. Again.
Well, another 2 ticks from me.
It's really good.
This is an extraordinary song. This is the part where I thought actually we're getting into sort of really clever musical territory, because this is a song that's really cleverly constructed, that's pieced together as a piece of art. That I like the sort of call and response thing made it gave it that sort of musical vibe.
I like the Eddie Cochran bit at the end, referencing Summertime Blues.
Yeah. What was that? Yeah, it was that. What if we take our problems to the United Nations?
It's like a punchline, it's a bit of humour, but
it's
bitter
a perfect
humour.
placement of it, though, isn't it? It's just yeah.
And probably a political statement, probably fit right in our podcast. The biggest problem I'm seeing here is that we're all just being like, yeah, this is all really good. Boring. Can we have an argument about something?
I know. Well, I did kind of think when I chose this album that maybe it was just too good. And if we're all going to be in agreement, it's not going to be quite as interesting as if we'd have chosen something a bit more jarring. But it's nice. It's nice to agree occasionally.
The biggest thing for me was kind of you've been asked to figure out what your favourite album of the year is, and I'm kind of having to rethink that because I've listened to this now, and it's an extraordinary thing. But actually, the thing that was really interesting, and particularly about this song, was the bit where where I really started to think this is just a piece of conceptual art that is really different from any of the things that we've listened to up until this point. This is an artist.
It's bigger than songwriting.
Work.
It's bigger than making music.
This is a really conceptual piece of art, which is, I think, a staggering achievement for anybody. But I think it's just intellectually,
and it's the same next song,
incredible.
All and Everyone, which is like first Gallipoli song, I think. And again, we're not going to argue about this, are we? This is my favourite one so far. It's fantastic. Sad, heartbreaking.
Really?
Stuff.
This was actually probably the song I least connected with on the album. I've read, my note was more death and misery.
Yeah, what was that? Was that not your note for every song after track one? It was mine.
This is where the death and brutality really kind of comes to the fore, isn't it? The absolute slaughter on the shores of
Yeah.
of the anchorage. But again, the words don't overburden the music. It's still a tune of some beauty, even though the content is absolutely
Pretty much
horrific.
every listen of the album, I haven't necessarily played that. I haven't paid close attention to the words. You can hear them, and you can pick up on a lot.
This one's harder to avoid with lines like "death was everywhere." It's just it's.
Of course, but it doesn't. Yeah, you don't have to wallow in the misery. You can still just appreciate it for being lovely music that's with nice vocal melodies.
I think that's my point. Or one of my points. I don't think this album does wallow in misery. It lays bare the horror and brutality and absolute pointlessness of war, but it's not a wallowing in misery album. It's not a miserable album. It's a powerful album. It's an album which rages against pointless wars, but it's in no way wallowing in its misery. It's quite the reverse. It's angry. It's incensed. It's poetic in its brutality.
Yeah, it's not preachy. I think that's the most important thing about it. It's detailing some really horrible stuff without. You don't have to then go on and tell us that war is bad. People who don't realise that already are idiots. The same thing with On Battleship Hill. It's it's more of the same. It's more Gallipoli and it's more horror. Remarkable singing on this song as well.
Yes, the vocals go right off the scale on this.
Yeah, they do.
And I love that whatever that
the brushes
sound is that's going on there. It's that,
those two tracks,
like
All and
skiffle.
Everyone and Battleship Hill, were the two tracks on the album. We got 3 ticks from me, which means excellent. Like kind of, it doesn't get much better than this.
Good stuff.
Beautiful songs.
It's kind of the whole album has a bit of a sort of. It's weird. It's got a very sort of folky music feel
really does.
to it in a weird way. Even though none of it is in the least bit folk. And I think again, I don't know whether that is part of the sort of subject matter, because they're not really, although they're not at all playing folk instruments in any kind of folk style, but it does have that kind of folk.
I don't know that I agree with you entirely there, because I think like The Words That Maketh Murder does seem very sort of trad folk to me, and so does The Colour of the Earth. It's got that kind of, it's very sort of folky sound to it as well. But I think the album does as a whole, it's not very trad folk. No, it's not. I can't think of the name of any trad folk English bands to contrast it with. Steel Eye Span.
I was thinking more about some of the stuff that done by Kate Rusby.
I don't know who that is.
And who sort of in the noughties, probably even in the late 90s, been reinterpreting old English folk songs.
Right.
And did you ever see the TV series Sharp?
Yes.
Where they were sort of in Napoleonic Wars, that kind of thing.
I never saw it, but I know what you mean.
So in that they would have various folk songs on the soundtrack which were mimicking that, and they would be done by modern artists. And I think Kate Rusby sang a couple of things in that vein. There were sort of Napoleonic era folk songs that were sung by the military. So, and a lot of the imagery in that would be kind of stuff that probably influenced PJ Harvey, I would think, in some of those old English folk songs. So I've heard those things done in that style, and it is very evocative of that. We're talking about Gallipoli, and we're talking about the 2 world wars, and we're talking about Afghanistan things, but actually I think some of the imagery goes further back to the Napoleonic Wars and things like that, and it was all very. I've lost the track of what we're talking about now, other than those kind of old English folk. The folk music stuff. But I think Kate Rusby has kind of done that stuff in a modern style, and it's the instrumentation on that is not dissimilar to some of the stuff that's going on here.
Yeah, I think that young men dying pointlessly in wars is a pretty timeless thing, isn't it?
But often, as you say, it's done very kind of preachy and kind of Route One, whereas I think she does it here with a kind of poetry and subtlety that, as you said, it's not in the least bit preachy. It's more just really a statement of.
Yeah, it's like, if I can make maybe not a very good
Without.
comparison, it's like going to a sort of war photography exhibition or something like that, where it's just simply detailing how things are or how things were, rather than, there's no sensationalizing of anything. It's just like, this is what it was like, and it's not preaching, it's just telling.
The war photography is quite interesting because there's a whole load of videos that go with this album by a guy called Seamus Murphy, who was a war photographer in Afghanistan, and I'm sure you've all read the same blurb as I have, but PJ Harvey went to see his exhibition and then started a conversation with him and then collaborated on a whole suite of films that go along with these tracks. I'll sit and watch them all today. Well, it's intercut. It's kind of bits of performance, very kind of intimate performance, mainly PJ Harvey in a cottage playing bits of instruments and occasionally other bits of the band. But lots of scenes of England, really, and occasional little flicks of kind of battlefields, but on the whole, kind of atmospheric flicks of England. But they do add, worth watching if you haven't, they do add an extra layer of interest to what's already a very interesting and multi-layered album. Worth watching.
I was aware of the connection. I'll continue to set them up and you can keep knocking them down, yeah?
Oh, yeah. That's what it goes. If this was a vinyl album, that would have been the end of side 1. And then we flip over to England, first track on side 2. There's a bit of a change of pace with this one.
My least favourite on the album. I'm not a big fan of this song.
I agree. This is the point where the album started to slightly dip.
I think this was a really interesting idea with the sort of Kurdistani woman wailing in the background, and it sort of this was the other one where it starts out at time and then slowly kind of comes together, and actually it's you know, this is the bit where talking about musical, but this is sort of almost cinematic. You can kind of see this happening in a very
sounds like a film
cinematic way.
I suppose, yeah.
I think it's it's one of the hardest tracks because it's the least melodic in her voice, and it is, you know, her. You mentioned the Kurdistani woman wailing in the background. PJ Harvey's delivery is almost a wail in the foreground. It's you know, there's no real kind of melody, no real song going on there. There's a deep sadness that she's kind of letting out there, but it's not my favourite song, but it's one of the most powerful songs on the album, I think. Powerful tracks, rather, on the album.
I thought it was a very good track, and I kind of liked the way it built.
How many ticks?
2.
Okay.
In Dark Places, again, starts very, very small and sparse and builds into something quite extraordinary by the end of it.
Big fan of this one.
It's quite bluesy thing. Great horn. Love the big horns at the end. Yeah.
What's your view on this one, Will? Did you have anything interesting to say about this?
Nothing.
How many ticks?
This is a 3-ticker. Just a brilliant, brilliant song. Without being, you know, normally you say brilliant song. This is the kind of song that, you know, is the obvious single off the album, blah, 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 blah. But it just was perfect. This is my favourite song off the album.
This is so boring. We're just agreeing about everything. Yeah.
We're just, well, that was always the danger, wasn't it? But
is it?
Bits of Branches, the next track. This was the one for me that sounded most like the PJ Harvey that I knew. This
sounds actually like Kamikaze from Stories from the City.
I hate this one. I don't really. Just trying to inject a bit of controversy into the whole affair. I don't hate this one.
Hate it? How can you say that?
I like this one. Not my favourite, but it's good.
I really like this one.
Yeah, it's a strong one. Again, vocal delivery and the kind of arrangement with it was a lot more kind of old school PJ Harvey, I think. But in a great way.
I think the guitar line is a rip-off from Stories from the City, to be honest. But
she's ripped herself off.
She's ripped herself
off. You
off.
can't rip off yourself.
Exactly.
Rip off.
And at least if you sue yourself, win or lose, you get all the money. It's beautiful.
Pretty sure if you do that, the lawyers get the money, right?
That's true. You represent yourself on both sides of the court.
Oh, that's true. In your own courtroom.
Yeah, in your own courtroom.
We should rattle through these because we're all in too much agreement. We should get onto the more contentious stuff.
Something that I think you've all said is the second side isn't as good as the first side, and it goes apart from track 8 and maybe track 10, Hanging in the Wire. For me, it's still good songs, but not the same quality as side 1, and so paling in their glory, as it were. So
I don't know that I agree.
I did think about this because my first listen to was that, yes, it did fall away halfway through, but then I listened to it a few more times, and I think it's just simply that the second half is quieter and more sparse, and there's a lot of kind of war drums in the first half, and there's a lot more just kind of space in the second half of it.
I totally and utterly disagree with what you've just said, Chris.
Because the next song, "Hanging on the Wire," that's like a hymn. I mean, it's a thing of fragile beauty. It's absolutely it's one that the first couple of listens to it just kind of washed over me, but actually sit and listen to it. It's absolutely
it's a highlight on the album, I think. Yeah.
I think my view on the first half, second half, apart from England is the one song on the album that I don't really like very much, and I don't hate it. I mean, not to the point where I'd skip it, but I think it is the weakest song. But I don't think the second half, that side, is weaker. I think that the whole album, listening to it start to finish, it gets a little bit fatiguing, and that's not because the songs are weaker. It's just because it does have such an unusual sound to it. And although I think that's a good thing, I think it can make the listen quite tiring. But I've said this about albums before when we've done them, that I found it quite difficult to listen to the album start to finish and actually pay attention to it, because it's just a little bit too much to take in. And I think that if you split it into its two halves, actually it's got more of an emotional pull, the second half, I think, than the first half does. Although musically it's maybe a bit more powerful.
Yeah.
A bit more in your face, the first half. Written on the Forehead, the second last song, is a little bit different from all the others, with that Let It Burn thing that's going on in the background. It does, the song's a bit different from everything else.
Yeah, that Let It Burn sample really kind of embeds itself in your head. I don't know where it comes from, and it does feel very different. But I didn't realize it was taken from something else.
No,
I think it's
another layer.
It's Blood and Fire by Niney.
It's
it's where it comes from.
Reggae thing.
Not familiar with that.
But actually, that song really kind of seemed evocative of the multicultural Britain of 2011. That was where you were kind of.
I was about to make the same
being
point. Yes.
The folky album.
Yeah, it made me think. I mean, I used to live in Dalston, and East London people would say, but it's North London really, and it's extremely multicultural. That area has the largest Turkish population outside of Turkey in the world, and there's an awful lot of West Africans there as well, and an awful lot of Caribbeans as well. And it just, Ridley Road Market there is a real melting pot, and it made me think of that really. The sort of very white Englishness of PJ Harvey's music combined with the very black music sample, and it's a positive thing. I think that's great. And at the same time, the song is decrying our behaviour abroad, and our murdering of foreign people with different coloured skin and so on, and it makes it a more powerful statement. I think it's a very strong song. It's not the best song on the album, but in some ways it's got the strongest message, I think. No, it probably doesn't, but it's one of the strongest messages on the album, I would say. It's very good, very clever, very intelligent. The whole album is, though. So
I got it up there as one of my favourites. Probably not quite my favourite, but it's up there in the top three. I think this one.
The Colour of the Earth, the last song, was first listen, and I think also second listen when it started, because this is the other sort of folksy, sort of English folk music kind of one. And I kind of I rolled my eyes a little bit at it, because it's just so bloody English to have a song like this on your album, but it's brilliant. It's heartbreaking. It's really brilliant. It's a standout on an album of standouts. It's great. It's sad. And also when I listened to it earlier and I actually paid attention to what the lyrics were and sort of read them as I was doing it, it brought a tear to my eye. It's absolutely heartbreaking. It's pretty mighty piece of work, really.
Musically, this reminded me of Venus in Furs.
Did it really?
I think just that kind of the the kind of the little, I don't know what that thing is called, but the percussion on it was that's what it took me to.
Oh, interesting. Well, never occurred to me, but I'll bear that in mind on the next listen.
Listen
I will.
again.
Yeah.
So I kind of feel I've done a disservice by choosing an album that we all think is
I disagree.
pretty good. Whereas obviously this chat's far more entertaining if there's this chat's far more entertaining if there's a bit of a disagreement.
No, I don't.
But I mean, it's I think it's just an astonishing album, and I think it's well deserving of its position in the top of all those best of 2011 lists. And I think equally, 9 years later, it still sounds extremely strong. It's not something that has diminished over time. It's still as relevant now. It's still as musically interesting now as it was 9 years ago.
The fear for me in music is almost daily there are songs being recorded, produced or put out that are lost, let alone the great stuff that I'm actually missing because I can't listen to it all. And I will admit I missed this album in 2011.
Because it kind of went under the radar at the time.
Well, as we'll discuss in the next few minutes, I wasn't very fond of 2011 musically.
Oh,
so I was having a bit of a downer on it. And so I missed this one. I've always thought of the Mercury Prize as slightly elitist and not for a working class boy like me. So
I think the Mercury Prize is nonsense. I'm actually put off an album by even being nominated for it, which is completely unfair, I know. But the fact that this won it in no way says to me, hang on. Yes, great, I know. But M People won it as well, right? And you're not going to tell me that Elegant Slumming is a classic for the ages, are you?
There you go. This is what we want.
One exception that proves the rule. I mean, we've had, 25 years of
and
Mercury
they're
Prizes?
nearly all
M People
political,
is just
the
1 year.
awards.
There's 24
This
other
doesn't
great
make them bad albums, but the awards are political, as such awards always are, and I just can't be bothered with it.
Badly Drawn Boy won it for Bewilderbeast.
Great album.
So that's
big fan of it. Yeah.
Proof enough that it's a valid thing.
I just don't. Awards are nonsense.
I hadn't looked at the nominees for 2011 until right now.
What else was there?
Adele, 21. KTB, James Blake, Anna Calvi, King Creosote and John Hopkins.
Oh, nice.
Which
Token
I
folk
remember
nomination, which is never going to win. Never has.
Well, but John Hopkins, who's sort of on that kind of electronic thing as well, that was a really interesting album.
Anyway, I disagree with you, Chris, about this being a bad choice because for several reasons. One, part of the reason we started doing this was to discover new stuff and to introduce each other to stuff that we didn't know. And although I was familiar with PJ Harvey, I'd never listened to this album, and although I was kind of pretending I didn't like it before we started talking about it, I think it's fantastic. I wasn't convinced on my first listen. I found it a bit annoying, to be honest, but it's not just grown on me. I think it's wonderful. I think it is absolutely deserving of all the plaudits it's received, of winning awards, of whatever. It's a great album. It's also reminded me that I think that PJ Harvey is a great artist. She's absolutely brilliant. And, I'm always... You've heard me bang on about this before, about women in music and how they have to conform to certain male ideals in order to be successful, and she's never done that, and she is just her own self. It doesn't matter that she's a woman, she's just a musician, and there aren't enough women that are like that and who are allowed to be like that. And she is brilliant. She is absolutely brilliant. She is. I think she used to be a bit of a musical hero of mine. I kind of went off her, and just found her a bit mainstream. And that's completely unfair. She's absolutely brilliant. So thank you for, even though this might be a really boring listen, for which I have to apologise to everyone listening. It's still been great to hear a great album. And I hope we convince people to listen to the album if they don't know it. It's fantastic.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for enthusiasm, isn't there? And I think we have enthused over this album, and rightly so, because it is a work of goodness and greatness.
Welcome back to 2011, and thought we'd have a chat about our favourite albums of 2011. It was an interesting year, lots of good stuff. I'd like to hear what you boys liked. I'm going to start with you, Al.
Well,
what was your favourite album?
2011 was a bit of a black hole for me. I don't know what I was doing, but I wasn't listening to many of the albums that came out.
Me.
There's
similarly.
a lot of stuff there. When I was having a look at stuff that was released, there's a lot of stuff by bands that I think I probably would like if I knew them, but I don't. And I was going to go for El Camino by the Black Keys. as my favourite. 'Cause it's not a great album, but it's a good album. It's got Little Black Submarines on it, which is a cracker. But I'm not a huge fan of it. But like of all the stuff, it was the one I was thinking that this is the best. But actually, my album of the year is PJ Harvey, Let England Shake. It's better than El Camino. Hands down, it's better. So that's my album of the year. Number one single was a bit more difficult. And I did give them all a listen. And
it's not easy listening,
no,
is it?
that's not the term I'd have used. Really, the only one that I remotely liked was Price Tag by Jessie J, which was a great chorus attached to an not particularly good verse, but it is a really catchy chorus. But when you're that dreadful sort of negging One Direction song is one of the best number ones of the year, you know you're not in a classic year for number ones. Yeah, I found it quite depressing just how similar so many of the songs were, and just how little variety there was in the types of music that was being obviously bought in big numbers. But, well, that's just the way it is, right? This music, I'm already an old man in the eyes of the kids by this point, and it's not aimed at the likes of me, so can't complain. Don't mind the Jessie J song.
Exactement. What about you, Will?
Album of the year, Wasting You, by the Foo Fighters. And the Foo Fighters are a weird band for me because I'm determined to like them, although I struggle to really like them, but I keep going. And here's the reason why. Have a guess why I keep going with the Foo Fighters.
Is it because you like Dave Grohl? He's a nice man.
I knew you'd say that.
It's the nicest man.
I knew you'd say
He's a
that.
nice man.
Or is it rock?
Yeah, it's not the reason.
Nice man.
The reason is they've got the coolest band name that's ever been invented in the universe. So I keep going with them, and also because Dave Grohl is such a nice man.
I don't really rate their name.
What?
What is Foo Fighters?
Foo Fighters.
It's an early term for UFO. Before we start calling them UFOs, Foo Fighters.
Yeah, it's
That's
cool.
quite a good name for a band, I think.
Oh, they've gone up ever so slightly in my estimation, but still not enough to really like them.
I want to like the Foo Fighters as well, but I've just never really heard anything by them that I thought was better than alright.
Yeah, I'm kind of the same. So that was my album. As far as the single is concerned, pass. Absolute pass.
You're not having
I
anything.
am not putting anything in.
I was quite tempted to
It was
pass,
so
yeah.
well, number one single. It was so
Yeah, it's
and
slim pickings.
bad isn't the word. I won't use bad on music. It was so ordinary, and so manufactured and boring and lacking of any heart and soul and energy. What a terrible year. Boo. Shame on you, 2011.
Thank you, Will. So the Foo Fighters thing, the only thing about that is go and listen to the song Big Me, which is Dave Grohl's attempt to write a Teenage Fan Club song.
Okay.
And apparently he's a big fan, and when you listen to that, you'll get it.
Right, cool.
Which is great. Okay, Chris, what have you got for us in 2011? Favourite album?
Well, similarly to Al, I think 2011 was one of those points where I just wasn't really getting into new music. I think I was probably listening to a lot of Six music rather than going out of my way to buy new stuff for myself. So I was looking back through my stuff, and I think I did only buy 2 albums that year, and one of them was Let England Shake. But the other one, at the risk of repeating myself, because I've already done a bit of an Arctic Monkeys thing earlier today, was Suck It and See, which was Arctic Monkeys' 4th album, I think. And is not my favourite Arctic Monkeys album, but I listened to it again the other day, and it has got some brilliant tracks on it. So I think that has to be my favourite album of 2011. In terms of number one single of that year, I did, again, I listened to all, God, there were loads. It seems the further through the years you get, the more singles make it to number one for a shorter amount of time. And I did the top 40. And then I looked at the indie number one to see if that was any better, and it was pretty much the same. There's some weird point where the indie chart and the mainstream chart, so the indie chart was dominated by Adele, with a bit of example. And the mainstream chart was dominated by Adele with a bit of example. And I really couldn't choose.
I like to think of Example as being a young Walter Matthau. He looks a little like. And I like him more when I think of him that way.
Well, yeah, I think I would too.
I'm just going to refresh your mind. I would quite like to boycott it as well, but that seems a bit wrong. One of the few songs. I'm not even going to go for Adele.
I hate that Adele song.
Pass. You can pass.
It's not a bad song, is it? It's not. Yeah, but compared to everything else that was
You
there,
can pass.
No, it's awful. The Adele song.
Ah.
It's just shouting at the top
Well,
of
I'm
her
left
lungs.
with Military Wives wherever you are.
Actually,
That's
that's
like
that.
the theme of the
I'm going for
album.
Military
that
Wives
brings a
with
tear to
Gareth
my eye.
Malone.
That one does.
Chris, that means we have to put that on the playlist.
Well, that's true. Well, no, I mean, it goes to a good cause, won't it,
Yeah.
I suppose. Let me go with that. I mean, the theme of this week is war, so I'm going to go for the Military
Oh,
Wives
I like
and
the way you
Gareth
did
Malone.
that. Nice.
Excellent. Nice.
Yep.
Well done.
Nick?
Well, for me, you know, you're all moaning about. There's actually quite a few albums there that I kind of, when I look back, I realised, and there's one.
It's easy to say if you've listened to any of them.
So, but I hadn't even realised that King Creosote and John Hopkins was released in 2011. That would have been right up there on my list, but it wasn't on a list that I read. There was Tom Waits' last album, Bad As Me, came out. There was Kate Bush, 50 Words for Snow, which is good as well, like the El Camino thing. There was a couple of Scottish things. Mogwai had Hardcore Will Never Die, but You Will. And Roddy Wimble released The Impossible Song and Other Songs. I really like those things. I really like the Civil War's Barton Hollow, which is an extraordinary country record. But actually, there was two things I was trying to think. Actually, there was the Decemberists. Have you ever listened to them? Their album that year, The King Is Dead, is REM-ish. I think, Al, you would like this.
Okay. Well, there's REM, there's REM.
Yeah, but it's good REM era tribute.
If it's good REM and not bad REM, then that's fine by me.
It's good REM era. The King Is Dead. It's a great album.
What's bad, REM? Just for the record?
Adele.
I don't know. Well, that's a nightmare. It's not quite the same thing. Bad REM would be like Up and I don't know, that sort of era. I mean, not necessarily terrible, but not it's not Life's Rich Pageant, right? So yeah.
Okay. So I think the Decemberists King Is Dead is sort of that era REM. I like, but there was two things. The Beastie Boys' last album, Hot Sauce Committee Part 2, came out that year, and that was something I hadn't quite picked up on that year, but came to later, and is an extraordinary album. My favourite album of the year was by a band called Beirut, called The Riptide, and it's they're an American band with sort of slight Tex-Mexy, folky influenced Brazilian music. There's lots of folky instruments and lots of horns on there, and he has this very plaintive vocal delivery, which is really beautiful. I've heard a couple of
Beirut tracks, but from a lot more recently, which were quite special, but I hadn't really heard of them from that far back. I didn't realise they'd been around for that long.
I really, really love his voice, and that album very specifically was sort of slightly different from other things he'd done. It's quite synth heavy, but it's just a beautiful record. So that was my favourite one, and my favourite number one of the year. I did have a choice, and it was Bruno Mars' "The Lazy Song," which it's just quite a nice, happy song. It's daft thing. I don't know if you've seen the video with the monkeys. That's kind of fun.
That's what it comes down to.
We spent. It's one of those ones that you can kind of spent some happy time singing along with the kids. The other song I wanted to mention was Little Mix had hit with Cannonball, and it's dreadful. But the original of that song by Damien Rice is a beautiful song.
I played that at a wedding. The original.
Did you reduce the bride to tears?
Not at that point, no. But the night was young.
But And
I hope that wasn't my wedding.
No, I played in a wedding band with some friends who I miss very much, who lived down in London. Sam and Rich and Lucy and Bob. And we played in a wedding band down in Bristol, and that was one of the songs. Actually, I think it's quite possible that I didn't play anything on that. I think it might have just been acoustic guitar and voice. And then we did Take That, Back for Good after it. Was it Back for Good? Yeah, it was. I played bass on that one. I played guitar and the rest, but we did a pretty good Back for Good, I got to say. Not one of my favourite songs,
a great
but
song.
we stormed it.
That's a great song.
If Take That, I'd seen it, they'd be like, this is where we've been going wrong.
That's a weird song. That's a weird song to play at a wedding, isn't it? Back for Good.
It depends whether it was the first wedding or not.
I was in the supermarket like a couple of weeks ago, and their comeback single when they came back without Robbie, which is We Can Rule the World. That one. That's a great song. That's like the greatest, like I don't know. Like the greatest Snow Patrol song that Snow Patrol never recorded, you know? It's very much in that sort of vibe of that.
There was a fine line between Snow Patrol and later Take That.
But yeah, so that whole sort of like emotionally charged indie thing that like Snow Patrol and lots of other bands, the sort of post-Coldplay sort of indie guitar, Take That really tapped into it very effectively.
Well, it's kind of like Coldplay with added emotion, isn't it?
Yeah, I noticed nobody chose the Coldplay album as their album of the year.
Unconsciously uncoupled from Coldplay.
Yeah. You and the rest of the world, hopefully. Do you know the song from that year that I presumed would have been a number one, but wasn't, but was the big sort of summer hit? Do you remember Foster the People, Pumped Up Kicks?
Nope.
Oh.
Which I think is a great song, and has been covered by lots of people. And that was everywhere that year, kind of, but never.
It wasn't everywhere. It wasn't at number one in the charts. I don't even know what song you're talking about. I'm so old. I don't care anymore.
Oh, the crazy girls with the pumped up kids, you gotta run. It's about a school shooting.
Yeah,
that's nice.
That's right. Yeah.
Would have fitted in with a general
subject
theme.
matter for it. Well, don't like Monday did.
Yeah, but you made it sound like upbeat. You didn't drop a minor chord when you sang it. It was like la 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 la. Somebody got shot. Ooh.
That's how it sounded to me.
Oh, sounds great.
But it was a song that was covered by lots of bands.
It was everywhere.
The Cooks, Weezer did
what
it.
song you're talking about?
You will recognise it when you hear it.
Is it Get Lucky? Is that the one you mean? Yeah.
That's it. Yeah.
Good title for a school shooting. So we're just left with next time's bag.
Yeah. Well,
what's happening next time?
We went to random.org, a website that I like far more than I should, to pick as a random year, and it came up with 1995. Now, what would you guys think would be the worst kind of year to have to choose an album from? Because I would have thought it would be one where it's just like, I don't like anything, like 2011 sort of was.
No, the reverse,
actually,
one where you've got lots of really great albums.
I own so many albums from that year, and I really like them, and it's like,
too much
choice, and it's like, I want to do this one, but I want to do this one, but I want to do this one. It's been so hard. Oh my god, like the first Elastica album. Clouds Taste Metallic by the Flaming Lips, Wowie Zowie by Pavement, Pacer by the Amps. Nick will probably have spotted one that I haven't mentioned, which had to be my pick because, oh god, I love Teenage Fan Club, and Grand Prix is a highlight of their career, one of their two absolutely standout albums.
Well, I'm quite looking forward to this because Teenage Fan Club are one of those bands that totally passed me by at the time, but all my Scottish friends that love music love Teenage Fan Club.
If it's an opportunity to share this album with more people, then I'm down.
So, should we wrap up 2011 and looking forward to 95?
Yeah.
Good. Drink to that. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Merry Christmas.
That is latency.
That lag.